Namaste. This is Roger Thunder. I would like to weigh in today on Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, an ancient book, ancient writings that really set down the procedures for, let's say, yoga, meditation, attainment to a higher level of consciousness, the science of the mind, control of the mind, all of those. There's a lot of good points in the Yoga Sutras. Sutras mean strings or threads that lead to enlightenment or that lead to the practice of trying to attain enlightenment, and different levels of samadhi. Samadhi is actually another word for enlightenment or raising your consciousness, just in layman's terms here. There's all kinds of gems, gold nuggets in these teachings. And these teachings are exquisite as far as being able to learn how the mind works in relationship to the consciousness or the awareness, what part the mind has. Now, I've talked about standing in awareness, and I've talked about looking at your body and your surroundings and the objects that surround you, again, one being your body, from a witness point of view, or let's say a higher awareness, or let's say the watcher or the seer. Well, Patanjali's Yoga Sutras fits right into this, because when you're standing in awareness, the thought might arise, well, if I'm standing in awareness and just watching, do I have control? And as soon as you say, do I have control, then I has to be defined. And I would be probably the lower self because you want control. But on the other hand, things can be controlled. The mind can be controlled, or let's say the mind can be observed so that you know what messages you may want to send from, let's say, the mind in between the higher self, and the best way I could describe it, the borderline there in between the lower self and the higher self, when you get some facility through knowledge and practice, then control comes easily. In other words, you really don't need to control if you know how everything works. So, everything works because of impressions that are formed in the mind. The mind modulates. The mind has a way of modulating pure consciousness down into impressions. And impressions are there or imposed on us through nature and social conditioning and all kinds of things. Impressions. That's why it is so important to have a mind like a still pond, mind like water, mu shin. That's a Taoist term. Mind like water. No ripples. Thoughts are ripples. Ripples are impressions. So, Patanjali set out the way to practice or attain a clear mind, no ripples, a still mind, which would allow you to raise your consciousness to a higher level and have a more enjoyable and a more peaceful life and a more loving life. That's really the key here, is do you want to have a more peaceful life? Do you want to have a more loving life? And there's all kinds of things I could not go into. I'm just giving a brief description of the things that you might find in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras here. I'll just pick out a few things. Now there's a way to deal with the world. And there's a way to deal with people in the world and, let's say, influences in the world, or vibrations in the world, or tendencies in the world, tendencies in people. Patanjali says there are 4 kinds of people. There are happy people, there are unhappy people, there are virtuous people, and there are evil people. How do you deal with these different kinds of people in the best way? In other words, how would you deal with running into any one of those or observing any one of those kind of people in the real world to make your life easier and your life run more smoothly? So let's take the first person here, the happy person. There is a story about a person that is sitting in their car, and let's just say, and it's an older car, it's not a new car, and it's well used. He's sitting in his car, he or she is sitting in their car, and they're looking across the street, and they see somebody walk out and walk towards a Mercedes, or let's say any kind of expensive car, Rolls Royce, Silver Arrow, whatever. And you're sitting there in your worn out used car. How do you view that person? Because that person might be very happy. This is just an example. They might be having a happy life, a free life, a relatively financial free life, and enjoying what they have achieved from that life. Now you could immediately be jealous. You can immediately say, go into some tirade about, these rich people, they have no spirituality or whatever. You can go off onto a tangent. Or you could say, you know what, it's really nice that those people are happy. And you know what? I'm glad those people are happy. I'm so glad. It's such a good feeling. The way to deal with it is the last way, okay? By giving good energy to that whole situation. Looking at that person, that happy person, and being glad that they're happy. What does that do inside of you? Well, we'll talk about that later. The second person you might come into contact with would be an unhappy person. What is your attitude towards an unhappy person? Compassion. Compassion would be the attitude that you should have for the unhappy person. You send them love and you send them compassion. Then we have the virtuous person that you might run into, the very virtuous person. And you can define virtuous in any way that you see fit for this example. Are you jealous because they're virtuous, or maybe they have some self-control, or maybe they have a handle on a certain way of thinking, which allows them to be virtuous? You admire that. That's how you treat that person. You have admiration for the virtues that person has exemplified in their life. Let's move on to the evil person. Evil people. People that do misdeeds. People that want to hurt others for their own gain. People that want to disregard. And evil could fall into, it's like that old Hermetic principle of the thermometer, where it's hot or cold. Where in between there lies hot and cold? When does it start getting hot? When does it start getting cold? It's the same way with evil. When does it start getting darker and darker? Now, if you want to try to reason with an evil person, it's usually futile. It's usually futile because if they're evil, if they have a heart of darkness, they're not going to be changed by you arguing or debating or doing anything of that nature with them. So what's the best way to approach an evil person, or if an evil person comes into your proximity? Indifference. Now this is hard for some people. How can you be indifferent to the evils of the world? How can you turn a blind eye to all the evil that's going on in the world? You're not turning a blind eye to it, okay? You're indifferent to it. You see it exactly for what it is, okay? You're not turning a blind eye. You're not looking the other way. But you are indifferent, which is a supreme form of detachment. Now let's go back and kind of look at the whole big picture here with the happy person and the unhappy person and the virtuous person and the evil person. Are all those people inside you? Because you're looking at the world and you're seeing things through your eyes, through your mind. And remember again, the mind has ripples, has impressions, has filters, has all kinds of garbage in there that has been indoctrinated into you. So let's say if you are treating a happy person the way I mentioned before as being, yeah, that's great, be happy, enjoy things, enjoy life. Well, then what are you doing? You're actually, you have all those people inside of you, so you're allowing the go-ahead, let's say, to the happy person inside you, to what the happy person inside you should deserve. Now, what about the unhappy person inside you? You give compassion to that unhappy person. So you're giving compassion to the unhappy part of you. What about the virtuous person? You applaud them. Well, you're applauding the virtue of whatever virtues you may have inside of you. What about the evil person? I would contend that if you're indifferent to the evil person, it has no emotional control over you. And so likewise, if you are indifferent to the dark side, we all have a dark side. If you're kind of indifferent to it, it has no control. The evil cannot take effect. These are, some of these are my thoughts. Some of these messages are my thoughts, okay, mixed with Patanjali, having been a meditator for many years. So this is a very good way to look at things, okay, because what is within is without, and what is without is within, okay? What's outside is inside, and what's inside is outside. So in dealing with the outside, you're dealing with the inside as well. It profits both inside and outside, because inside is outside. Excuse me. Now let's look at the world as a whole. Let's think about that for a minute. When we look at the world as a whole, we see all kinds of elements out there. The world is people, people is the world. Thoughts are people, thoughts are the world. The collective unconscious, the collective consciousness. So immediately, if you start looking at this situation where the way you would deal with people, and that would be the same people, as I said before, that make up you as a person, then all of a sudden you realize that in your treatment of these different people, the world could change as well. What you're manifesting, what you're seeing, how you perceive the world could change as well. This is what we're talking about here when we're talking about yoga and union. Yoga means union. Let's not forget that. It means union with a higher level of consciousness. Some call that Isvara, this higher level of consciousness, or Purusha, this higher level of consciousness. And this higher level of consciousness could be called supreme consciousness, it could be called cosmic consciousness, it could be called immaculate consciousness. It would be the prime mover, the activating force of the universe, the creative force, the prime mover, manifesting in myriads of forms and myriads of metaphors, such as gods and goddesses, which all have different aspects. And these gods and goddesses or metaphors or energies, all, when known, from like, let's say you look at a goddess in the Hindu tradition, or you look at a god and the qualities or the different characteristics that god or goddess brings. Well, that's all inside of you as well. As above, so below. That's the Hermetic principle. So, if you want to get along with others in the world, you might want to practice these instructions, all right? Now, this could even help in relationships. If you're having a quarrel, well then, you have to look at the other person and try to deduce in your mind whether they're unhappy, whether they're happy, whether they're virtuous, and whether they're evil. We can all project darkness, okay? So if somebody is projecting darkness and ignorance to you, you are indifferent to it. You're indifferent to it. But then another part of that person might just be unhappy. So what you have to do is project compassion to that part, okay? The point really is here that you can't become emotionally involved. You can't be blown about like a wave on the ocean. You have to be tranquil. You have to approach life with a tranquility and a peaceful peace of mind, okay? And there's constant bombardment here. Now I'm going to tell another story about the world and dealing with the world. And this story is about a man who is standing on an acre of land, let's say, or could be standing anywhere, and he sees a cave, or let's say a cave or a hole that goes deep down into the ground. And there's a tree near the cave, and he's got this rope, and he wants to explore the cave. He wants to kind of move on down there and see what's in that cave. He's curious. So he ties the rope around the tree, and as he ties the rope around the tree, he makes sure that it's firm. It's firm around the tree. It's tied very tightly. He tests it, tugs on it, kind of leans back, makes sure, just like a climber would, testing a rope, a climbing rope, make sure that rope is secure and solid. So he slowly wraps the rope kind of around his waist and kind of rappels down, or lets himself down into the cave, and he goes deeper and deeper. And it gets darker and darker, and he goes a little bit more deep and a little bit more dark and a little bit more no light above, further and further on down. He's got a long rope here, no problem. As it gets down into the cave, he can't see anything for a while, but slowly he starts seeing things, almost like sensory deprivation. He sees things, and he starts feeling things, and he starts having, let's say, hallucinations or visions. And he's in a whole different world than he was above, okay? And he sees things that are frightening, and he sees things that are kind of funny, and he sees things that are enjoyable, and he sees all kinds of things. Well, you might liken that to us in the living in this world. We're living in a world, and we're seeing all kinds of things, and some things may be funny, and some things may be ghoulish, very ghoulish, and some things may be horrendous, and some things may be blissful. But all the time that we're operating in this world, it's like we're in the cave. Do we have a rope? Do we have a rope that is secured firmly, that we can cling to and, let's say, crawl our way back out of the cave and get into this this blue sky and trees and air? Can we get there out of this world? Well, that depends on how firm your foundation, or I won't say foundation, I will say strength, your strength and your, you could say firmness around the tree, the rope around the tree. That would be your spiritual practices and your connection with Isvara, or the higher consciousness, or the immaculate consciousness, the all-seer, the one who sees all, the Purusha. And you can look at that as your higher self, because if it is part of the cosmic consciousness, then you could look at that as a higher level of consciousness. So, these are ways, okay, through meditation and through the practice of yoga, union. What brings you into union with a higher consciousness? The rope. What brings you into a spiritual practice that is, what teaches you a spiritual practice? Well, it's the threads. It's the sutras. The Yoga Sutras, the Union Sutras, teaching you how to be unified, teaching you how to see what the mind is. The mind is part of that little eye. You have big eye and you have a little eye. The big eye is the supreme consciousness. The little eye has a dot on top, like a little eye would. And that dot represents ego. And ego is a product of the mind. It's a product of the impressions of the mind. So I hope that you have gained some knowledge out of this video, and just thought I would expound a little bit or weigh in on some of the thoughts in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. It is the supreme manual, guide, the original, which came from even before then, probably before it was written down, passed down by ancient sages and yogis, and so that we would have access to that in this day and age for the times that we live in, and the perilous, sometimes perilous. Now, I think I'll end on one last thought, and that last thought would be people sometimes practice meditation and they fall from grace, or they get to a certain point and they think they're making headway, and then they feel good, and then the next day some incident will happen in their life that will bring them down, and they will think that they have accomplished nothing in their practices of meditation. This couldn't be further from the truth. When you fall, it's actually in an advancement. You're going to a different level. You climb up, you might fall down a rung. You climb up some more, you might fall down another rung. Climb up some more, but progress is being made for sure. Sometimes when you fall from grace, or when you fall back down into an old way of being that you didn't particularly think that you was benefiting you, it's just part of the procedure. It's part of the process. It's part of walking on the road, the good road, all right? So it's nothing to get disturbed about. It's nothing to quit over. I'm going to quit now. It just isn't working out for me. I'd rather be miserable, and I'd rather be hangdog and wallow in my misery. Just forget that notion and keep on keeping on. Keep on trying, but don't over try. Make progress as you see fit. In other words, don't push yourself too hard, because pushing yourself too hard isn't letting go, is it? So at some point you have to trust this rope that you're hanging on to. Now, there's some sayings out there that I want to address as well. Some of the New Age people say, let go, let God. Let go, let God. Well, that's a good saying. Or they might say something like, I'm a spiritual being having a experience in a physical body. This is all well and good as long as it doesn't become a cliche. Don't let it become a cliche. Just go, yeah, that's what I am, and that's what it is, and okay. But see, that's not enough. That's not enough. What you have to do is you have to know what those cliches mean, or what those sentences mean. You can't just say them and think that you know them. You have to put it into practice. You have to come to a self-realization. You have to have an epiphany. You have to have a feeling. You have to have an experience. Okay? You have to have an experience. Now, if you couple this with videos that I've put out before about standing in your awareness, raising your consciousness, spiritual breathing, kriya breathing, abdominal breathing, mantras, ohms, mudras, hand positions. You start working all these things together, and you start you start learning as much as you can, and then you try to just go into a spontaneous feeling every time that, let's say, you want to meditate, or anytime you want to get into that different level of consciousness. You have all these tools at your disposal here that can be used. Yoga is union, okay? Union with the divine. And it'll make your life a heck of a lot easier. I'll leave it there for today. This is Roger Thunder. Namaste.